Sarah Martinez stood frozen in the middle of the crowded coffee shop, her face burning with embarrassment as her ex-husband Marcus's laughter echoed through the bustling morning crowd. The familiar sound that once brought her joy now felt like shards of glass cutting through her already fragile confidence. "Look who's here, everyone," Marcus announced to his colleagues from Pinnacle Tech Solutions, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "My ex-wife, the failed entrepreneur. Still trying to make it in the big leagues, Sarah?" The group of men in expensive suits turned to look at her, some smirking, others looking uncomfortable with Marcus's public display of cruelty. Sarah clutched her laptop bag tighter, the rejection letter from her latest business loan application still fresh in her memory from that morning. She had come to this coffee shop, their old favorite spot, seeking solace and perhaps inspiration for her next move. Instead, she had walked into what felt like a carefully orchestrated ambush. Marcus had always been charming in public, but behind closed doors, their 10-year marriage had been a slow erosion of her self-worth. He had systematically dismissed her business ideas, calling them cute little hobbies, while building his own career in tech sales. When she finally found the courage to leave him 3 years ago, he had made sure everyone in their social circle knew it was because she was unstable and delusional about her capabilities. "Remember that app idea she had?" Marcus continued, turning to his colleague James, the VP of sales at Pinnacle. "She thought she could revolutionize small business management. I tried to tell her that real business is left to people who understand it, but she wouldn't listen." Sarah felt the familiar knot in her stomach, the same one she'd felt countless times during their marriage when Marcus would belittle her dreams in front of others. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the 3 years of therapy, or the small victories she'd accumulated while rebuilding her life. But instead of shrinking away, she felt something else rising within her, a quiet, burning determination. "I remember that app," she said quietly, stepping closer to their table. The coffee shop seemed to hush around them. "The one that would have saved companies like yours millions in operational costs. The one you said would never work because women don't understand real business." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Oh, Sarah. Still living in Fantasyland, I see. Tell me, how's that empire of yours coming along? Last I heard, you were still working out of that tiny shared office space, desperately trying to convince investors to take pity on you." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Sarah's consulting business was struggling. After the divorce, she had lost most of their mutual contacts, who sided with Marcus's version of events. Her savings were nearly depleted, and the constant rejections from investors and banks were wearing down her resolve. But she had been making progress, slowly building a client base of small businesses who appreciated her innovative approaches to operational efficiency. "At least I'm building something of my own," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Rather than just riding on other people's success?" James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had known Sarah during her marriage to Marcus, and had always found her business insights surprisingly sharp. In fact, some of her ideas had been quietly implemented at Pinnacle after Marcus had shared them dismissively at company dinners, though she had never received credit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus stood up, spreading his arms wide in theatrical fashion, "I present to you the woman who thought she could out-business the business world. Sarah, why don't you tell everyone about your latest failure? I heard through the grapevine that First National turned down your loan application. Again." The coffee shop had gone completely silent now, with other customers pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely liberated. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and avoiding for 3 years. Marcus had finally succeeded in publicly destroying what was left of her reputation in their shared professional circle. "You're right," she said, setting down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "They did turn me down, just like the other banks. just like most of the investors I've pitched to. But you know what, Marcus? Every no has taught me something. Every rejection has made me stronger. Every failure has shown me exactly what I need to fix. She looked around the coffee shop, meeting the eyes of the strangers who had become unwilling, witnesses to this confrontation. And unlike some people, I don't need to tear others down to feel successful. Marcus's laughter followed her as she walked toward the door, but this time it didn't break her. Instead, it crystallized something inside her that had been forming for months, a plan that she hadn't even fully admitted to herself until this moment. As the door closed behind her, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Elizabeth Chen, her old college roommate who had made it big in private equity, had been trying to convince Sarah to think bigger for months. "Liz," she said when the call connected, "remember that conversation we had about acquisition opportunities in the mid-market tech space? I think I'm ready to have that talk." 3 weeks after the coffee shop humiliation, Sarah sat across from Elizabeth Chen in the gleaming conference room of Chen Capital Partners, surrounded by financial documents, market analysis reports, and laptop screens displaying corporate structures. What had started as a conversation about Sarah's hurt feelings had evolved into something much more strategic and calculating. "I have to admit," Elizabeth said, sliding another folder across the polished table, "when you first called me about this, I thought you were just venting. But the more we dig into Pinnacle Tech Solutions, the more interesting this becomes from a pure business perspective." Sarah had spent the last 3 weeks in a state of focused intensity she hadn't experienced since her graduate school days. Every morning she woke up at 5 a.m. to research, analyze, and plan. She had transformed her small home office into a war room, with whiteboards covered in organizational charts, financial projections, and strategic timelines. The initial research had revealed something Marcus had always kept from her. Pinnacle Tech Solutions was not the thriving company he portrayed it to be. Despite their flashy office and expensive client dinners, the company was hemorrhaging money. Their main product, a customer relationship management system, was losing market share to more innovative competitors. Their client retention rate had dropped 40% in the past 2 years, and their revenue was propped up primarily by long-term contracts that were set to expire within the next 18 months. "Look at these numbers," Sarah said, pointing to a spreadsheet that had taken her days to compile from public filings and industry reports. "They've been covering their losses by taking on more debt. Their current debt-to-equity ratio is astronomical. They're basically one bad quarter away from serious financial trouble." Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, impressed despite herself. "You've done your homework. But Sarah, you need to be honest with me about your motivations here. Are we talking about a sound business investment, or are we talking about revenge?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question for weeks. In her more honest moments, she knew that revenge was part of it. The memory of Marcus's laughter, the way he had deliberately humiliated her in front of strangers, the years of subtle and not-so-subtle undermining, it all fueled her current obsession. But as she had dug deeper into Pinnacle's operations, she had discovered something else. "Both," she said finally. "But Liz, look at what they're doing wrong. Their customer churn rate is through the roof because their product hasn't been meaningfully updated in 3 years. They're losing clients to companies offering exactly the kind of innovative solutions I've been developing. This isn't just about Marcus anymore. This is about a genuinely failing company that could be turned around with the right management." Elizabeth studied the financial projections Sarah had prepared. "Your turnaround plan is ambitious. You're talking about essentially gutting their entire product development team and starting over. Not gutting, restructuring. Most of their developers are talented, but they're being held back by outdated management practices and lack of vision. Marcus and his old boys club leadership team make decisions based on what worked 10 years ago, not what the market needs now." Sarah had spent considerable time researching Pinnacle's employees through LinkedIn and professional networks. She had even discreetly reached out to a few former employees who had left in frustration. The picture that emerged was of a company with good bones but terrible leadership. Exactly the kind of situation that private equity firms specialized in fixing. "What about the personal aspect?" Elizabeth pressed. "You're talking about, essentially, destroying your ex-husband's career. That's a big step, even if he deserves it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, remembering not just the coffee shop incident, but years of smaller humiliations. Marcus telling their friends that her business ideas were adorable. His habit of interrupting her during dinner parties to correct her professional opinions. The way he had systematically isolated her from their shared professional network during the divorce. "Marcus built his reputation by standing on other people's shoulders," she said finally, "including mine. Some of Pinnacle's most successful client strategies were based on ideas I developed during our marriage. Ideas he dismissed to my face and then presented as his own innovations. He doesn't deserve what he has, and more importantly, he's actively making that company worse." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Okay, let's talk numbers. Pinnacle's current market cap puts them at about $50 million, but given their debt load and declining revenues, I think we could acquire them for significantly less. Maybe $30 million if we time it right." "I've been thinking about that," Sarah said, pulling out another document. Their biggest client contract, the one that represents about 60% of their revenue, comes up for renewal in 4 months. I happen to know that client pretty well. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "How well?" "Well enough to know that they've been quietly interviewing other vendors because they're frustrated with Pinnacle's lack of innovation. If that contract doesn't get renewed, Pinnacle's valuation drops by at least half overnight." "And you think you can influence that decision?" Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. "I think I can offer them something better. I've been developing a next-generation version of exactly what they need, something that would make Pinnacle's current system look like it was designed in the Stone Age." Elizabeth leaned forward, her business instincts fully engaged now. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked Elizabeth through the business management system she had been developing. For the past year, what had started as a project for small businesses had evolved into something that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies manage their operations. The system integrated customer relationship management, inventory tracking, financial reporting, and predictive analytics in ways that existing solutions couldn't match. "This is impressive work," Elizabeth said when Sarah finished her demonstration. "Have you filed for patents?" "Provisional applications for all the core innovations." "Full. Applications will be ready within 2 months." "And you think this could compete directly with Pinnacle's offerings?" "I think this could make Pinnacle's offerings obsolete. But more than that, I think this could be the foundation for rebuilding Pinnacle into what it should have been all along." Elizabeth closed her laptop and looked directly at Sarah. "Let me be clear about what you're proposing. You want my firm to help you acquire a struggling tech company, primarily so you can fire your ex-husband and prove that your business ideas were better than his all along. Is that accurate?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I want your firm to help me acquire an undervalued company with strong fundamentals and turn it into a market leader using innovative technology that I've developed. The fact that it would also prove my ex-husband wrong is just a bonus." Elizabeth laughed. "Sarah Martinez, I think you might be more ruthless than I gave you credit for. Let's do it." As they shook hands across the conference table, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. 3 weeks ago, she had been a struggling entrepreneur with a failing business and a fresh wound from public humiliation. Now she was planning a corporate takeover that would either vindicate everything she had ever believed about herself or destroy what was left of her financial future. But as she looked at the research spread across the table, the financial projections, the market analysis, the technical specifications of her software, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt truly confident. Not in spite of Marcus's cruelty, but because of what it had revealed about her own strength. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of Pinnacle Tech Solutions, watching Marcus through the glass conference room walls as he gestured animatedly to his board of directors. He had no idea that the emergency investor meeting he was attending was actually his termination hearing, and that the woman he had humiliated in public was now his new boss. The acquisition had moved faster than anyone had expected. Elizabeth's initial assessment proved correct. Pinnacle was in worse financial shape than even their pessimistic projections had suggested. When their largest client declined to renew their contract and instead signed with Sarah's consulting firm for her new management system, Pinnacle's stock price had plummeted overnight. The board of directors, desperate to avoid bankruptcy, had been remarkably receptive to Chen Capital Partners' buyout offer. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez, listed in the paperwork as Chief Technology Officer and Strategic Development Lead, was the real architect of the acquisition. "Are you ready for this?" Elizabeth asked, joining Sarah in the lobby. "Because once we walk into that room, there's no going back." Sarah smoothed her navy blazer and checked her watch. She had spent the morning in meetings with Pinnacle's department, heads explaining the transition plan and assuring key employees that their jobs were secure. The response had been overwhelmingly positive. Most of the staff had been frustrated with the company's stagnant leadership for years. "I've been ready for this my entire marriage," Sarah replied. "Let's go." The conference room fell silent as Sarah and Elizabeth entered. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a flush of anger that Sarah recognized from their worst fights during the divorce. "What the hell is she doing here?" Marcus demanded, turning to the board chairman, Robert Hayes. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet the new ownership team, Elizabeth Chen from Chen Capital Partners, and Sarah Martinez, who will be taking over as CEO." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah watched as Marcus processed the information, his face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. James, the VP of sales who had witnessed the coffee shop incident, stared at her with something approaching awe. "This is insane," Marcus said finally, his voice rising. "You can't be serious. She's my ex-wife. This is a conflict of interest. It's unethical. It's business," Sarah interrupted quietly. "The same business you said I'd never understand." She opened her laptop and projected a presentation onto the conference room screen. "I've spent the last 2 months analyzing this company's operations, and I've identified several key areas where we can improve efficiency and profitability." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah walked the room through her turnaround plan. She detailed the flaws in their current product offerings, presented her innovative management system as the foundation for their future development, and outlined a restructuring plan that would eliminate redundant positions while investing in areas that actually generated revenue. The board members asked sharp questions, which Sarah answered with the kind of detailed knowledge that only came from months of intensive research. She had solutions for their cash flow problems, strategies for winning back lost clients, and a technology roadmap that would position them as industry leaders within 2 years. "What about current management?" asked board member Patricia Weston, glancing meaningfully at Marcus. "That brings me to the personnel changes," Sarah said, advancing to her final slide. "Effective immediately, we'll be restructuring the executive team to align with our new strategic direction." She looked directly at Marcus. "Marcus, your position as VP of Strategic Partnerships is being eliminated. We'll be consolidating those responsibilities under our new client relations structure. You'll receive a severance package as outlined in your employment contract." Marcus stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "You can't do this! This is personal vendetta, not business!" "Actually," Elizabeth interjected calmly, "this is exactly business. Your department has the worst performance metrics in the company. Client satisfaction under your leadership has dropped 60% in 2 years. The board approved this restructuring plan unanimously." Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness as she watched Marcus struggle to process his new reality. Part of her had imagined this moment would feel more triumphant, but instead she mostly felt tired. Tired of carrying around the weight of his criticism, tired of proving herself over and over again, tired of letting his voice in her head tell her she wasn't good enough. "You want to know the really ironic part, Marcus?" Sarah said as security appeared at the conference room door to escort him out. "Remember that app idea you laughed at? The one you said would never work? That's what's replacing your entire product line. Turns out women do understand real business after all." As Marcus was led from the building, still protesting and making threats about lawsuits, Sarah turned back to the remaining staff. The room was charged with nervous energy, but she could also sense something else: relief. Several employees were trying to hide smiles. "I know this is a lot of change to process," Sarah said to the group, "but I want you to know that this acquisition isn't about settling personal scores. It's about building something better. Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting with each of your departments to discuss how we can support your work and remove the obstacles that have been holding you back." James raised his hand tentatively. "Sarah, Ms. Martinez, I just wanted to say that some of us have been hoping for changes like this for a long time. Marcus wasn't exactly popular with the staff." Over the following days, Sarah learned that Marcus's behavior toward her hadn't been an isolated incident. Multiple employees came forward with stories of him taking credit for their work, undermining their projects, and creating a toxic work environment that had driven away talented people. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that this acquisition was about more than personal vindication. It was about rescuing a company from genuinely destructive leadership. 3 months after the acquisition, Pinnacle Tech Solutions had been rebranded as Pinnacle Innovation Systems. They had won back 2 major clients, launched Sarah's management software to rave reviews, and were on track to double their revenue within a year. Sarah had been featured in several business magazines as an example of how innovative leadership could turn around struggling companies. Marcus had tried to sue for wrongful termination, but his case was dismissed when it became clear that his firing was based on documented performance issues rather than personal animosity. He eventually found a position with a smaller firm at a significantly reduced salary. Sarah kept a photo from the business magazine article on her desk, not because she was proud of the publicity, but because it reminded her of something important. The caption read, "Martinez proves that the best revenge is massive success." But that wasn't quite right, Sarah thought every time she looked at it. The best revenge wasn't success. The best revenge was discovering that she had never needed his approval in the first place. The best revenge was building something better than he had ever imagined possible. The best revenge was proving to herself that his voice in her head had been wrong all along. Marcus had laughed at her in that coffee shop because he thought her dreams were too big for someone like her to achieve. Now, sitting in the CEO office of a thriving tech company, Sarah realized that her dreams hadn't been too big at all. They had just been too big for him to understand.